Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be talking about something that's honestly a little bit disheartening.
Yeah.
It's the gender gap in STEM and other scientific fields.
Right. And the thing is, there have been so many efforts towards equality for so long.
Yeah,
It's kind of shocking that there are still so few women at the very top, like the real superstars.
absolutely. And that's what we're going to be diving into today.
Exactly.
Why is it that at those highest levels, we're still seeing such a persistent gap?
Yeah.
So to help us unpack all of this, we're going to be taking a close look at some really fascinating research by Gwyneth G. and Joe.
Mm-hmm.
They published this in the Journal of Applied Psychology.
Okay.
And it's really all about what's happening at the top.
Right.
So they look at fields like math and genetics and even psychology.
And that's what makes this so interesting is that we're not just talking about the overall gap, across the board, but like you said, it's about those top performers, the stars, because they have such a huge impact.
Huge.
They're not just doing groundbreaking work themselves,
Right.
but they're shaping the entire field. They become mentors, they attract funding, they really kind of set the standard for what success looks like.
Totally. They're the thought leaders. They're the ones that everyone's looking up to.
Absolutely. So when women are consistently missing from that picture, it sends a message.
Yeah.
And that impacts, the whole system.
Absolutely. So let's start off by kind of just painting a picture of how big this gap actually is, especially at the top.
So if we take a look at mathematics as an example,
Right.
women only hold 7.3% of full professor positions,
Wow.
which is a really stark number.
Yeah, that's shocking.
And it's not just math data from the National Science Foundation back in 2016 showed that women are underrepresented across the entire STEM workforce,
Yeah.
even though they make up half of the college-educated workforce.
Right. So it's not even just a pipeline problem.
Yeah. Like, it's not just about getting women into these fields.
Mhm.
It's something that persists even after they're there.
Right. And it kind of reminds me of that whole Google memo controversy a few years back.
Oh, yeah?
That really brought the question of women in tech to the forefront.
It did.
Although the memo itself was
Yeah.
a little.
Yeah. A little controversial. Let's just say that.
It sparked a lot of debate,
Mm-hmm.
but it really highlighted that, we need to move beyond just acknowledging the problem
Yeah.
and start to understand those underlying factors.
Totally. And I think that's where this whole concept of the star performer comes in. Right? These are the people that are producing a significantly higher output than their peers.
Exactly. And that's what we're focusing on today.
Yeah. Why is there this gap specifically with the star performers?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it'd be even more important to have women represented at that level.
Totally. And why is that? I mean, like, why focus on them specifically? What makes that star performer gap so important? Well, think about it. Their influence goes so much further than just their own research.
Okay.
I mean, they become those role models. They attract the funding. And like we said before, they really kind of set the standard for what success looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So if women are consistently missing from that top tier, it sends a message.
Yeah.
And, it impacts the whole system.
Right. And it's almost like perpetuating this cycle, right? Because
Yeah.
then younger women who are coming up through the ranks, they don't see as many people to look up to.
Exactly.
So it makes it even harder for them to break through.
Right. And this research really dug deep into that. They didn't just say, yep, fewer women stars, case closed.
Yeah.
They actually looked at specific ways that those stars are made.
Okay.
So they explored these things called generative mechanisms.
Oh, yeah.
And basically, these are the processes that explain how these stars emerge.
Okay.
So not just that they exist,
Right.
but what drives that exceptional productivity.
So they're like the recipes for star making.
Exactly. And they looked at 4 main mechanisms, each with a pretty cool analogy.
Okay. I love analogies.
Yeah, they make it much easier to grasp.
For sure. So hit me with them.
All right, so the first one is called self-organized criticality.
Okay.
So imagine a sand pile,
Okay.
and you keep adding grains of sand.
I'm with you.
And eventually it reaches this critical point where even just one more grain can trigger a massive avalanche.
Oh, yeah.
So this mechanism suggests that star performance is kind of like that avalanche. It's unpredictable.
Like a sudden breakthrough moment.
Right. It's a sudden, huge leap forward, and there's a good dose of luck involved.
So it's not something you can really plan for.
Exactly.
It's like that eureka moment that leads to this groundbreaking discovery.
Right.
Okay, that's fascinating.
So what about the other mechanisms?
So the second one is called proportionate differentiation.
Okay.
Imagine a snowball rolling down a hill,
Okay.
getting bigger and bigger as it goes.
I got it.
So in this model, early success leads to bigger and bigger gains over time. So it's like momentum building on itself.
Exactly like that rich get richer phenomenon.
Okay, so it's less about that sudden breakthrough and more about early wins compounding over time and creating this massive advantage.
Precisely.
Okay, interesting. All right, so 2 down, 2 to go. What's next?
The third one is called incremental differentiation.
Incremental differentiation.
Mm-hmm. And this one's all about steady, consistent effort.
Okay,
So think about climbing a mountain.
okay.
Each step you take brings you closer to the summit.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, so it's about that slow and steady progress.
Okay.
Consistently building your skills, your knowledge, your network.
So it's not so much about like inherent talent.
Right.
It's more about just putting in the work day after day.
Exactly.
Like stars aren't born, they're made kind of a thing.
Exactly.
I like that one. Okay, what's the last one?
Okay, so the final one is called homogenization.
Homogenization.
And this one's interesting because it's kind of the opposite of differentiation.
Okay.
Here, external factors act like a lid. Yeah. Constraining everyone's output
Oh,
and
wow.
reducing the differences between individuals.
So in this case, it's not so much about individual brilliance or even effort,
Yeah.
but it's more about the environment itself.
Right.
Setting like a cap on everyone's potential.
Exactly.
Okay, I think I've got a pretty good handle on all 4 of those mechanisms now.
Good.
But what do you think? Which one is the most likely explanation for how stars actually emerge in the real world?
Well, it's not really about guessing.
Right.
We need to look at the data.
Of course, the data.
And that's precisely what these researchers did with a very impressive level of rigor, I might add.
Okay.
They analyzed the publication records of thousands of researchers over 10 years.
Wow, thousands. That's a lot.
Yeah. And they didn't just count papers.
Go.
They even considered things like authorship order,
Oh, wow.
which can vary quite a bit between fields.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So they really went deep.
Yeah, serious attention to detail.
Absolutely.
So what did they find? Which mechanism emerged as the winner in this star-making competition?
Well, what they found was really fascinating. Across all 4 fields, they studied mathematics, genetics, applied psychology, and mathematical psychology.
Wow, all 4.
The best fit for both men and women was a power law with an exponential cutoff.
Okay, so back to our little generative mechanisms lineup. What does that actually tell us about how stars are made in these fields?
It means that incremental differentiation reigns supreme.
Okay.
So it's not about those sudden, unpredictable breakthroughs or early advantages snowballing into dominance. It's really about consistently building your knowledge, your skills, your network, step by step.
So more like that mountain climbing analogy you mentioned earlier.
Exactly.
Just as steady, persistent progress. That's actually pretty encouraging
Yeah.
for those of us who aren't just waiting for like a lightning strike of inspiration.
Right.
But wait, I thought we were talking about the gender gap among stars.
Yeah. Yeah.
If the same mechanism applies to both men and women,
Right.
then where does the gap come in?
That's where it gets even more interesting.
Right.
So while both genders follow that same general pattern, there's a consistent difference in the shape of the distribution.
Right.
The right tail, the part that represents those very top performers, was always lighter for women.
So even though they're both climbing the same mountain, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
fewer women are making it to the very top.
Exactly.
But why is that? Is it because men are just naturally better at math and science?
Uh-huh.
I mean, that's kind of what that whole Google memo was trying to argue, right?
Well, this research actually suggests otherwise.
Correct.
They looked at 3 potential explanations for the gender gap.
Okay.
Differences in abilities, gender discrimination, and differences in career and lifestyle choices.
Okay, so let's break those down one by one. First up, abilities. Are men just inherently better suited to these fields?
Well, if we consider that dominant generative mechanism we talked about, the incremental differentiation, it seems less likely that inherent ability is the main driver. Because think about it, if everyone is steadily accumulating knowledge and skills, then inherent ability wouldn't necessarily create such a dramatic difference in the size of their advancements.
Okay, so if it's not about raw talent, then could it be that women are facing more obstacles along the way? Like they're getting less support, fewer opportunities, even if their work is just as good?
That's where the gender discrimination explanation comes in.
Okay.
And the research suggests that this is the most likely culprit.
Really?
So even if women are accumulating knowledge and skills at a similar rate, their progress could be hampered by bias
Okay.
in hiring, funding, collaboration opportunities, and even just those everyday interactions that can make a big difference.
Yeah, it's almost like they're hiking with a heavier backpack.
Yeah,
Even if they're just as strong and determined.
exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about that last explanation? Career and lifestyle choices. I mean, it's no secret that women still often carry a heavier load when it comes to family responsibilities.
Right, and that's an important point, and it likely does play a role, however. Considering our incremental differentiation model, lifestyle choices would more likely affect the rate of advancement, not necessarily cause those sudden drops in output.
Okay.
So, for example, a woman might take a break from research to raise a family,
Right.
which could slow down her climb up that mountain,
Okay.
but it wouldn't explain why her individual steps are consistently smaller than a man's who's taking the same path.
Ah, I see. So it's more about the overall pace
Mm-hmm.
than the size of each individual step.
Exactly.
That's a really important nuance.
Yeah.
So what's the verdict? Can this research definitively say why there are fewer women star performers?
Well, while it can't prove causation with absolute certainty, the evidence strongly suggests that gender discrimination is the biggest factor holding women back from reaching true star status.
Wow.
So it's not just about getting women into these fields, it's about ensuring that they have equal opportunities to thrive once they're there.
That's a really powerful takeaway.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, right, if we're seeing this gap, even in fields like psychology,
Mm-hmm.
where there are more women overall,
Right.
what subtle biases might we be missing in our everyday interactions?
Yeah,
Especially in fields where women are even less represented.
absolutely.
Yeah. And it's not enough to just talk about it, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
we need ways to actually track real, tangible change.
Exactly. Data is key here.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be looking at things like representation of women at different levels, the gender pay gap, how resources and opportunities are being allocated.
Mm-hmm.
And just as importantly, we need to be transparent with those numbers
Right.
so we can actually see where we need to improve.
Transparency and accountability.
Yes,
I like that. It's about real, measurable change.
absolutely.
And it sounds like that change really starts with each of us, recognizing those subtle biases,
Mhm.
challenging those around us,
Right.
and advocating for policies that promote equality.
Precisely, if we can start to shift the culture, even in small ways, it can create this ripple effect that leads to lasting change.
Yeah.
And it's not going to happen overnight, but each step we take gets us closer to a future where everyone can reach their full potential.
So let's bring this back to you listening right now.
Yeah.
Think about your own workplace,
Yeah.
your field, even just the research that you're reading. Are women's voices being amplified? Are they getting the credit and the support that they deserve?
Here's something to ponder. If we're seeing this gap, even in a field like psychology where there are more women overall, what subtle biases might we be missing in our everyday interactions, especially in fields where women are even less represented?
That's a great point. It's a call to action for all of us to be more aware, more proactive. This fight for equality, it belongs to all of us. We can all be part of the solution. So don't be afraid to speak up, challenge the status quo, and demand better.
And I'm really curious to see what future research on this gap will reveal. I mean, will we start to see improvement in the years to come, or will these problems become even more pronounced? It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely have to revisit this topic down the road and see what new insights have emerged. For those of you who want to explore this further, we've got links to the original research and some other great resources in the show notes.
It's a complex issue, but the more we understand the mechanisms at play, the better equipped we'll be to address it.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the gender productivity gap.
Thanks for having me.
Catch you next time for another fascinating exploration of knowledge.